Sprocket Raccoon holds the distinction of being the first ever Beetleweight class fighting robot to feature a two-part lifting mechanism as its main weapon, inspired by the likes of Sewer Snake and Sandstorm from the heavier weight classes. This is a story of how the robot came to be. The story of Sprocket Raccoon began in September 2018, shortly after I attended the filming of Series 1 of Bugglebots, a YouTube series that showcased the emerging 1.5kg Beetleweight class of fighting robots, and that gave me the idea of building a Beetleweight robot of my own. I drew up some rough concepts soon afterwards for a raccoon-themed robot named Procyon. The designs looked a bit rough and ugly, but hey, we've got to start somewhere, right? However, I ultimately decided to make the Beetleweight robot a fox instead, which would be called Vulpa, while Procyon would be an Antweight instead. The design was heavily inspired by Ellisware's heavyweight robot Sandstorm and his featherweight Tormenta 3. I was intrigued by the dual lifting wedge and overhead bars combination, as such a weapon was very rare in robot combat in general, and it was completely non-existent in Beetleweights. So, lacking the necessary skills to use computer-aided design at the time, I enlisted the help of Harry from Team Panoramic to do the CAD and to assemble the robot for me. In the spring of 2019, Procyon arrived, and soon after I applied the paintwork, a friend in the chat group, sadly I forget who, suggested the name Sprocket Raccoon, named after the Marvel character Rocket Raccoon from Guardians of the Galaxy, which I realised right there and then was too good a name not to use. So, Sprocket was born, though the writing X Procyon on the top panel was a nod to its working name. The chassis was 3D printed ABS, and the lifter was powered by a high-torque N20 motor. There was supposed to be overhead bars as well for self-righting, but sadly the tight weight limit of the Antweight class meant that they could not be included. The robot, however, could still run upside down. Sprocket competed at Antweight World Series 58 that June, and won 2 of its fights and came 3rd in one of the Gladiator Rumbles. A respectable performance, but certainly there was room for development. However, I decided after experience with Vulpa later that year that Sprocket's full potential would be to be upgraded to a Beetleweight. So, in December 2019, I began construction on the first Beetleweight version of the robot, Sprocket Raccoon Volume 2, in a nod to the Guardians of the Galaxy films that the robot's namesake derived from. This would be the first time I would use computer-aided design to assist me in the building of the robot, if only to get a sense of scale and to see how much it would likely weigh, to see if such a robot could be feasible in that weight class. As it turned out, this was the case. We proceeded then to build using hand-cut UHMW for the chassis and with a titanium front wedge that was cut and bent by Jeremy Hall, who'd competed in Bugglebots with Splody Boy. The drive motors were 800 RPM motors donated to me by my uncle in America using FingerTech wheels. The two-part lifter was powered by a 37mm motor running at 100 RPM. In January 2020, Sprocket Raccoon V2 was completed, and the following month fought at the Bristol Bot Builders Beetleweight Championships, where after taking a hefty beating in the first round, we went out in the redemptions against O'Neill on the split judges' decision. The chassis was solid enough, but the lack of durability in the lifter was a wake-up call as to just how destructive this weight class can be, and this point was hammered home further during the whiteboard rumbles I took part in later on. Little did we know this would be our last event in well over a year, as the COVID pandemic would arrive just a few weeks later. While I had faith that the robot's design was a solid enough concept, it was clear that we would have to make an extensive rebuild to learn from the lessons of the previous event in order to improve. My skills with CAD began to improve as this time my friends Jasper and Spark at Vulpa Systems would assist me with building an experimental 3D printed chassis made from carbon Kevlar, while the weapon pieces would remain the same but would now be bolted into UHMW mounting to make it much harder to break off in combat. The drive motors were upgraded to these new BBB 22mm gearboxes running at 920 RPM, and I would fit bigger, fatter tyres to the robot for more grip. On top of that, the battery was now upgraded from 3S to 4S, which gave the drive and weapon much more kick. During the autumn of 2020, while COVID restrictions were still in effect to some extent, I met up with Dominic of Venator Robotics and Oliver of Mott & Bailey for some outdoor whiteboards, which was where we were wanting to test our new machines, and because they were all non-spinners, it was safe enough to do so and refine them accordingly. In June 2021, we all met up in Blairgowrie for our own mini practice tournament, which was good fun, before finally in July we would get to compete again at the Rapture Gaming Festival in Chatham, the first ever series of Robot Rebellion. Sprocket's campaign was much more successful than his previous one, winning all 3 fights in his heats against more experienced opponents in Night Fury, Tosser and Rev 4, before spectacularly going out in the round of 16 against 7th Circle in pieces. The carbon Kevlar chassis turned out to be more than a little bit brittle, and thus simply couldn't stand up to such punishment. But the robot's performance otherwise was a significant improvement over before, with the drive and weapon being much more effective in combat than previously. We just needed to get that durability dialed in more. Where Sprocket Raccoon V3 had failed, V4 would now succeed. While largely the same machine internally, Sprocket V4 would utilise CNC machining for the first time, with the chassis now made from CNC cut UHMW with hand-cut HDPE baseplate, hence completely shatterproof. On top of that, the wedge and bars were upgraded to 2mm hardox, which would also be more suitable at weathering impacts than the old Grade 2 titanium pieces did. The robot was now painted in a much more rustic antique bronze, as opposed to the gaudy golden bronze of the previous Beetleweight incarnations, which was actually a case of me buying the wrong paint and having to make do, but now I felt it was a good time to switch to a new colour scheme. At the BBB Beetleweight Championships in late 2021, Sprocket V4 immediately made a strong impression, winning the first round rumble against Badfather the Mucker and Stingbinder, before eventually advancing as far as the quarter-finals where we lost to Rust in Pieces by going down the pit. The robot also performed well in the Gladiator Rumble, and I was awarded the prize for Size Perky Drive System Award, which was the first ever merit award I had picked up in any tournament, which left me with a smile on my face almost as big as that of Sprocket. In March 2022, Sprocket would compete in several whiteboards at the first Scout Showdown, winning 2 of them. Then at RoboNorth in the summer, Sprocket would contest the Pinball Warriors Revival Tournament, and went on to win that event with a score of 340 points, earning me a very nice trophy indeed. By that autumn I'd already been working on a new version, but various technical gremlins would see that shelved for some time, so Sprocket V4 would compete again, now painted Battleship Grey, at Battle in the Borough 2. Sadly, this tournament did not go well for Sprocket, as parts that once worked stopped working as time and cumulative damage caught up with them, as well as the first instance where I lost due to losing my removable link. Winless in the main event, Sprocket did at least reach the second round of the Attitude Adjuster Bounty Tournament, losing on a close decision to Deja 2. Sprocket V4 would have one last outing in March 2023 at Scout Showdown 2 as a reserve for King Crossblow, beating Fang while piloted by myself, before losing spectacularly to BB Shrecked while being driven by Oliver. I took home the Sportsmanship Award for my troubles though, so I wasn't too disappointed. I knew at this point it was finally time to retire the machine, and soon afterwards he was broken up for spare parts. A sad ending to a machine that had survived multiple events and served me well. But Sprocket Raccoon's best was still yet to come. The coming of Sprocket Raccoon V5 was a long and arduous one. I decided that now was definitely the time to give brushless technology a try, having seen it used to great effect amongst my contemporaries. Initially I attempted to upgrade Sprocket to 6-wheel drive, but the result was a messy and overcomplicated system that was prone to breaking down a lot, and in order to repair it I would have to take half the robot apart to fix it. This simply would not do, and on top of that my attempts to find a more compact weapon motor hadn't been going too well either. Ultimately, I went back to a simpler 4-wheel drive system with more tried and tested Repeat Max motors, and used a much bigger Repeat Ultra motor for the weapon, which did have the power, in fact too much power, as it kept shredding the 3D printed gears that I'd been designing for it. With just a few days to go before Robot Rebellion in June 2024, Nathaniel Poet of Team SC came through for me and milled some aluminium gears for the weapon, which fixed the issue, and Sprocket was finally ready to compete once again. Thank you, Nathaniel. Sprocket kicked off his Robot Rebellion campaign with a bang, winning his heat, including against the seeded Wheelie Big Lad, and also exacting vengeance on O'Neill after 4 years. Then in perhaps the best fight I ever had with Sprocket, we went the distance in the round of 16 with unstoppable force, and won on a very tight judge's decision to advance to the quarterfinals to face Gizmo, Ellisware's defending champion. This was poetic in a way, since it was Ellis's earlier robots Tormentor and Sandstorm which heavily inspired the design for Sprocket. The fight was pretty much one-sided most of the time, but Sprocket did not relent until one last hit split the polycarbonate baseplate and the battery spilled out, resulting in an instant KO. I may not have won the fight, but it lasted a lot longer than most people did, which was a performance I could be proud of. And as an added bonus, Sprocket Raccoon also won the award for most aggressive, which is very fitting for this kind of robot. It is great to see how much Sprocket has improved over the years. Though there are still a few more things that can be done to refine the robot, it's great to see it can duel with the big boys and make them work for it. Hopefully there'll be many more fun fights with Sprocket Raccoon yet to come. Thank you for watching this video to the end, if indeed you still are, and all the best.